Hello everyone, today we're going to be talking about Warhammer 40k team tournaments. The first part of this video is going to be defining a bunch of terms and different rules. As some of you may know, there isn't actually a standardized format for what it means to play Warhammer 40k team tournaments, and so because of that I'm going to talk about some of the different types of rules that we've seen and how those tournaments operate across the world. Number two, we'll get into a discussion with a few really great players on their opinions on strategy within the team tournament, as well as how they organize their teams and kind of deal with conflict that arises. The third part of this video is called Genius or Grifter. The idea behind this is almost like a little bit of a trivia game where I give them some scenario that happens in game, and the people I'm interviewing have to tell me if they think that's a genius move or a grifter move, kind of slimy. Every single team tournament rule pack that I looked at limits the number of codices that a specific team can bring. What I mean by that is that 3 people can't all bring Imperial Knights. The issue, however, is how these codexes are actually defined. So for example, some people may think that Dark Angels is different than Blood Angels, which is different than Ultramarines. However, some tournaments will put those all together as Space Marines because they all share the same codex, even though they have different supplements. Additionally, many of these factions aren't really real teams. Like, no one's actually bringing an entire Sisters of Silence team, so you can see that there's not a whole lot of options. Additionally, some groups will say, well, if you bring Genestealer cults, but you bring a detachment of Blood Brothers, which are Imperial Guard, then you can't play Imperial Guard. So every team tournament has some type of rule that talks about how they limit codices, but you have to really dig down to the specifics to see how they actually define what it means to be a different codex. Another really important rule that's common in many different team tournaments is the idea of point differences actually mattering. So instead of you playing a game and then either winning or losing, instead what they do is they compare the difference in victory points scored and then give you a score based off of that. So for example, let's say we have Death Guard versus Tau, and the Death Guard gets a 90, whereas Tau gets 60. What we do is we look at our chart over here on the left, and we'd see that because of that, what's going to happen is out of a possible 20 points spread out, 15 points will go to the Death Guard team, and then 5 points will go to the Tau team. The real interesting part that point differential allows for is that you can actually only win 1 out of 3 of your games and still win the overall match. Let's say you have Space Marines and Tau playing against Space Marines and Death Guard respectively, and they each win by just a few points, like very narrow victories, and they're assigned a 12-8 point differential score. But Thousand Sons versus Chaos Space Marines, Thousand Sons get absolutely slaughtered, and then the Chaos Space Marines guys get 20 points. Well, what you'd see it happening is even though the blue team won 2 out of their 3 matches, red team actually has a bigger score differential and then wins that match. I also really like score differential because it adds more value in terms of denying your opponent's points and playing to the end. For example, let's say you go against someone who you know you're going to lose against. You still have an obligation to your team to play as hard as you can and get every single point you can, because the difference of losing by 50 or losing by 30 can be a significant impact on your team's ability to actually win the match. Another really popular rule set for team tournaments is the idea of attacker and defender for actually choosing who gets to play what. So for example, we'll start here that red team wins the roll-off and they put their Death Guard forward essentially as an attacker. Blue will put 2 of their teams forward as defenders, and then the red team will talk amongst each other and then select one of those defenders to actually play against. So in this case, Death Guard plays against Space Marines, and then now everything resets and blue puts something forward. Let's say they put up AdMech as the attacker, and then red puts up Chaos Space Marines and Imperial Guard, and then the blue decides they would like to play Chaos Space Marines with their AdMech. And this keeps going down and down until there's absolutely nothing left. All of those are very popular rule sets that exist in many different competitive Warhammer 40k team tournament rules packs. I wanted to define those before we actually get into the big discussion that I have with a few different players. So without further ado, the interview. Today I'm joined by Red. Red Powell is a co-host on one of the most popular Warhammer 40k podcasts in the world, Forge the Narrative. He's also the team captain of the Army Esports team. And a funny story, the first time I ever listened to Red was about 3 years ago when he guest starred on Adam Abramowitz's The Best General podcast. So in other words, Red, I've been a huge fan of yours for about 3 years. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. It's really awesome to hear. I mean, to think about it, time has just flown by from the time that I was on, Adam's a good friend of mine, and the time that was spent. I think back very fondly of those podcasts and what we talked about, and really, there's so much more to it than just the game. It was so awesome to be a part of Adam's journey. Because at the same time, I was kind of on my own journey, stepping into things with 40K, and so it's just I appreciate you bringing that up because it's just such good fond memories. So I'm glad you were able to appreciate it as well.
It was one of the first Warhammer 40k podcasts I ever listened to. And then the second person I'm joined by is Weston. So Weston is a good friend of mine and one of the first people I ever played Warhammer 40k with. He's been playing top tables with Space Marines since 2019. He's my go-to for Warhammer 40k list building advice and competitive tactics. He's also on the Army Esports team and led his team to the 7th place finish at a recent Warhammer 40k team tournament. Weston, how are you?
Doing good, happy to be on. It's always fun to talk on these events or these podcasts, and I'm just having a good time.
And I also forgot to say about Red too that he is the team captain of the entire Army Esports team. So that's a very also a very important piece of information to get across. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you guys about was Warhammer 40k team tournaments. In my mind, it's one of the best ways to play Warhammer 40k. I think it's just such an interesting way of playing the game. So I wanted to get your guys' take on what the ideal rule set is for Warhammer 40k tournaments. So we'll start with you, Red. What is your ideal team tournament rule set?
So first of all, I'm going to start off with agreeing that team tournaments are an excellent way to approach the game because it's really cool, and I love what ITC has done with having teams, period, where people can participate even if you're not necessarily playing together. And so you can kind of build this. It helps build the team in the background, right? Like it's an infrastructure piece that I think is really important to the community of the game and allowing people to affiliate themselves and have this other level of competition outside of just going to the games individually and there's a lot to that. And so going into a team tournament, I think is an awesome way to go about it. That's honestly, um, so from my background, I played fifth edition. I really started seeing models in 40K back in third and fourth edition, but I played fifth edition coming out of high school and going into college and whatnot while I was enlisted in the Army. And then I was going through their sixth and seventh, but I participated in the American Team Championship, ATC, out of Chattanooga. And when we did that, I'm trying to think, it was probably about 2017, I think, maybe 2018 when I did it. And my younger brother, brought me into it. And it was just such a good experience that really was something that brought me up and into the game even more so, um, because of just that event and how cool it was and hanging out with all the people. And so going into it, I think that team tournaments are very important. The next part being, so the format of it. I haven't had the pleasure of going to Adepticon yet. Unfortunately, recent events have taken into account COVID and whatnot has prevented me from being able to go. But I'm very much interested in going to see that. And so, to be fair, I've only participated in so many, high level team tournament events like that. But I have done some doubles formats here and there, and I have done ATC several times. And there's a lot to get out of that. And so going forward, if I was going to make a suggestion, for 40K team tournaments, and of course, talking to Adam, as was mentioned, and I've had the pleasure of talking to some of the other folks from Team America, and seeing their thoughts on what was the ETC, now the WTC, and how they go about that. I think there's a lot of good lessons learned from those events and how they've been run. And so I am speaking somewhat from an observer position when it comes to ETC or WTC, but what is now WTC, and then looking at ATC, you get some good examples. Now, some of it, and I do have a little bit of a background in regards of game design. I actually was fortunate enough to just get my master's in war game design, and so when it comes down to it, there's been a lot of good efforts done, and I think that there's a lot of great ways forward. I I don't know if we're at a point where we can say that there is necessarily data driven or results based evidence that says this is the best way forward. So I'm just departing from that point, and that this is very much my opinion. So to go along with that, the for the team tournament, so I like point differential to a point. I thought it was very interesting going from ATC and seeing how when how you win or lose, you can essentially have a very close game, and what the difference was, you end up as a tie, and those ties had very interesting impacts on how it went forward. So I think one part to it is how do they add up, and when you look at that and how it goes into it, it's a very big, important part of it. I personally, so there's some ways, and this kind of goes back to just the core game itself. I'd be very interested to see what the rules designers at GW thinks is the best way to go about a team tournament. I had been excited to hopefully be able to help facilitate getting the U.S. Army Esports to participate in the team events at Nova. They have at least the last time I looked into it, they had a 3-man event and also a 5-man event, 3-person, 5-person, trying to get those in. It was something that, how do we go about it? Is it battle points? Is that how they want to look at it? Is it the differential piece? I think it's very interesting. Personally, I think that games need to have differences depending on how well you scored objectives in relation to your opponent, which creates kind of a microcosm of differential in between, if that makes sense. Is it so far what I'm saying track, or have I gone off the rails?
No, I think that's totally good, because you mentioned one of the big points is like, hey, not all tournaments are doing point differentials, and there's no standardized team tournament rules that GW has come out with. But the other kind of things I've seen is one is not allowing the same codex between team members, and the other one is doing an attacker defender, kind of randomized.
I think that the setup with ATC, I really like the attacker defender, because that adds a whole new element into the game mechanics that it's not present in the game itself. It becomes a mechanic of the team format, which I think is really interesting and very engaging. And okay, so I'm going to set up this skewed list here and this skewed list here. And so talking about different formats, right? ATC, you have 5 separate tables that you're essentially playing on, which I think is awesome in its own way, because it really does go to player versus player, but also how the team captain or the coach or whoever manages those matchups. And so there's something to that I think is really powerful. There's also, you look at Adepticon, where it was like the kind of the double-headed dragon format, where you have 2 players that each have this many points playing on the same table against 2 other players. And so I think that's interesting, but I think that to a point, it definitely lends itself to the awesomeness that has been the Adepticon format from everything I've seen, with lore-based approaches and how they go into some of their team formats and grading for points and whatnot, which is really awesome. But I do like the ATC kind of table by table by table look. And then going back into the point differentials, I really do like that if you're able to achieve this much in comparison to what your opponent achieves, how that creates a margin of victory. And I think the margin of victory is a really big deal in how it plays into that. In regards to point differentials and whatnot, I think it helps demonstrate that if you have 2 players who are really good players that go up against each other, because, we don't even talk about ELO matchups or anything like that, or how that comes out, although I know Down Under Pairings has some degree of capability to demonstrate it. I think that it's very interesting, and with captain-based matchups and attacker-defender, okay, we know we're not just playing against these lists, but also playing against these people, right? There's these people that we need to consider, that they're able to do this, this, and this with these lists that they've taken. And we need to be able to counter and understand that, go in there with some situational awareness, and really prepare for how we're going to go to it. You can't just, it's at a team event, it's not just about knowing all the codexes and knowing just your army. It's also about knowing the teams themselves and how you're going to match up. And I think that that's an awesome, huge opportunity for the community to take advantage of when it comes down to it. And that's kind of where I'd like to see some of those things go forward with the different codexes and how we look at those, I think that I've seen some very interesting propositions with this. I find it very interesting for what people think it should be one way or the other. And it's interesting to see how some, even my own, how our biases contribute to those decisions and approaches when it comes to different codexes and who's considering what. Because, there's some people who are like, well, we should be allowed to have 2 of each or something like that. Well, we understand that not all codexes are created equal, and we understand that there are some different advantages here or there. And some codexes, you can create significantly slanted or skewed lists one way or the other, right? Heavy vehicles, heavy Lords of War, heavy what have you. And so to allow, I think, to not force some of the specific codexes to be broken up, I think you actually create a bigger issue. So I saw where, at some point folks have considered, well, let's just do it by Imperium, Eldari, Chaos, and other Xenos, what have you. And I think that that's a trap. I personally think that you should absolutely, and I like that, in a 5-person format, if you break it down by codex and you do that, and I can understand where some people might conflate Space Marines across the board. But if you break it down like that, I think that there's some value to it. I do think that Thousand Sons and Death Guard to a bit are easily associated with the rest of Chaos to a certain extent. Whereas I do think that Grey Knights, for example, are actually a degree removed, like so far removed from Space Marines that they could be their own thing. Whereas I think Death Watch is very much just, as we've kind of seen, like a supplement on top of the Space Marine Codex. It gets kind of weird and interesting when you start looking at the differences and start, some people might see it as splitting hairs, but I do think the time and effort devoted by a team tournament organizer could be very appreciated if they really go through a deliberate approach in that regard.
Yeah, and so Weston, what type of thoughts do you have in terms of ideal Warhammer 40K team tournament, Matt?
So I'm not going to go in as depth as that because I don't have that much information. But I'm a big fan of the attacker defender setup. I really enjoy sitting down with your team because usually you'll know like who you're going to fight next before the pairings come up just by looking at the points and stuff. And it's really fun talking it out and being like, all right, well, if we're defending, we'll drop these 2 lists and then hope that this person takes this one or whatnot. And like talking about like, all right, I'm good against these 2 armies, but this army I'm going to struggle, or vice versa. Or like you find that one army where it's like no one's good against it, but there's a player who's like, I think I can draw out a low scoring game. So then you try to throw them at them to tie them down and stuff. And that's always fun. I really enjoyed that. We a great example of that was at the team event. We had after our first round was against the Air Force team, and we did a little bit of we kind of did our matchups a little bad, and they got us good. They managed to wipe us off the table because it was a 0-3 game. And then after that, we started really looking at our placements and who we're gonna throw at who, and like who's gonna try to take grenades. Like my list itself is actually relatively decent at taking most armies on. Because I can shoot, I can fight, I'm pretty durable. So like I would try to take hand grenades. We had a player who, for whatever reason, is actually just impossible to beat with Death Guard. So he like, if he fights Death Guard, he'll beat him. He's just super good at Death Guard. He like only plays against Death Guard, so he knows everything about them. So we'd always try to throw him towards the Death Guard players, and he didn't lose to any of the Death Guard players we fought. So he's still holding that title. But it's stuff like that is a lot of fun. When I first started playing 40K, the whole 2 players with so many points combined fighting 2 other players, that's how like probably the first, I want to say like 3 or 4 years of my 40K gaming was, because I was young. I started like in 4th edition back when I could get my guardsmen in boxes of 20 for like $30. It was always, I was young, so like, and the rules back then were a lot more complicated, and when it came to like learning it right away, but I personally enjoyed them. But so you would play like team games with like the younger people in the game store. So like, it'd be like each player had like 750 points or whatever to work with, and you would team up and fight each other. And that's how 40K was introduced to me. So I played a lot of team events. I was actually surprised, funny enough, growing up, I realized that 40K is not made for that initially. I always thought it was. I like team events a lot. 1v1s are fun, but I don't know. It's really fun to work with other people and to like plan things out and have really good games or bad games. It doesn't really matter. It's still fun in the long run. It's just I feel like there's a lot more tactics and planning, like prep, versus like if you're doing like a standard like RTT, and you fight that opponent if they're near your bracket, and you're like, all right, well, this is who I'm playing, versus like this might not be who I'm playing, kind of thing.
Yeah, and the way both of you described it, just playing in these team tournaments inherently adds more depth to the games, the matchups, gives more value in terms of, hey, you don't just either lose or win, you get this points differential. So definitely a lot of depth added to that. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about was kind of that operational leading of the team. So specifically, what does it take to lead an entire, Warhammer 40K team, and what actually goes into that?
Yeah, so and I mean it's awesome to have Weston on here too, because I mean he can call my BS here if necessary, by all means. Um, but so it's this is the Warhammer 40K team for U.S. Army Esports is this awesome opportunity for us to play and represent the United States Army, and it's got an outreach mission. It's actually listed like U.S. Army Esports in the Army People Strategy for 2020. So it's this whole objective that clearly there's tons of us that are in the military that play war games and play 40K and play all sorts of other games. And so as the Army continues to strive towards really, engaging and being relevant with the community at large, using and capitalizing on esports and gaming in general has kind of been an area where it's reached out to. And I mean, there's been a lot of we're glad to be able to do it. There's some aspects and benefits to it, but it's not like it is definitely a volunteer thing. And so what's awesome is that there's clearly so many of us across the Army, across the military, right? Because you see Air Force gaming as well. And I know that some of the other branches are looking at trying to start up their teams. We're everywhere. I mean, we're all over the place, and it's so cool to be able to meet and engage with a lot of these folks that are out there doing it, and they're volunteering to help represent the United States Army across these broader venues. And so we're an at-large team, which means that we are spread out. I'm currently in Fort Bliss, El Paso, Texas. Weston and a lot of the other folks that are on the team are centrally around the Southeast. And then we've got people that are on the West Coast. We've got people in the Midwest. We've got, we've got someone's in England. We've got someone in Hawaii. We're all over the place. And that really goes to because, this isn't just esports where you can just jump on a computer and play against someone on the other side of the world. You've got to actually be able to be present to play the game. And so there's a lot to that. And so the kind of the operational approach, like you're mentioning, is trying to have people that are present and available across the entire United States to be able to play. And so fortunately, our team, the Army Esports folks, have allowed us to be a bit broader and have that and be able to have the members. There is different aspects to how we go about creating the team, and we're getting ready to head into another cycle of looking at these aspects and who we're going to bring on and whatnot. Unfortunately, clearly, as we all understand, COVID had its impacts and prevented some of us from being able to engage as much as we probably wanted to, whereas others, with the appropriate mitigations in effect and determined by region, were able to still keep on going safely. And so with that operationally, the focus of how do we get out there and what does the team look like. So it's fortunate we have a mission laid out for us, right? The outreach of being able to engage, which is awesome. Like for myself, if you go back to Adam Abramowitz or other places, you hear me on Forge the Narrative and whatnot, I am very community focused, and trying to engage in the community is a core concept of this. So we have that built in. It's not just about winning. Don't get me wrong, being competitive and being good is definitely an aspect of it, but it's only that. It's just an aspect. It's not the entirety. And so being able to appreciate that and understand that the game is not, while there are a lot of competitive aspects and everybody likes to win, we still want to enjoy ourselves going forward, and we know that you go into it, not everyone's going to always win. So recognizing that, yes, we want some competitive players. The next part being is that we need people, like Weston, who can go out there and represent for the team well, and Weston's someone that if I've met Weston on several occasions. There's some of the players that I haven't had the opportunity to meet. That's just how at large we are. But Weston and others amongst the team are people that you want to keep playing against, right? It's for the most part, that's what we strive towards. This is someone that I've played a game with, and I look forward to playing again, right? When you think about it, we spend 3 hours of our lives with people at all of these different events over and over and over again for different occasions, and how many times do we go into it and there's someone who you don't want to play with, right? And that's just unfortunate. And of course, so we don't want that to be the case with any of our members. And that's where, so when you look at the team part, and that's 2 of the 3 aspects, the third is really being able to make yourself available and socially engaged, because we don't just communicate at the events. You've also got to be able to communicate on a broader base. And so that's where we've got like Black and Gold Wargaming, which is a Facebook page that we manage as a group of military members that it's open and inclusive to anybody who wants to see it, but we try to highlight a lot. We share and look at and try to support some of the things that we're all doing as a team. And then the next part being, trying to bring in people at different levels, because some people are very competitive, but they might need to work on some of those other aspects I mentioned. And so the team has different levels of where we're trying to help develop each other as a team and bring each other along so that we can ultimately all be better teammates for one another and for our mission and what we're trying to accomplish as a team. So there's a lot to that. And I know I've gone through it pretty quick, but so that's kind of the 40K team at large. And so going into some of the other things that you're looking at, I've enjoyed talking about, 9th edition. I've really enjoyed the Crusade model, right? And I talk about it quite extensively whenever I'm offered an opportunity, so I can't help but plug it in here. So given that, I've been competitive. I am competitive. I like winning, but at the same time, it's very much, there's a community aspect to this. And so when we go into some of these team events and we start looking at it, there are competitive events, there are narrative events, right? LVO has both, Nova has both, Adepticon has both. It's just awesome to be able to see that. I don't really care to focus the team directly in on just one aspect. It does help with ITC that we can demonstrate our competitive capability to one degree or another. But if we have representation, so like Ivan Cho, one of the other team members, he's been playing what's the Age of Sigmar Underworlds, right? Kind of like the kill team for Age of Sigmar.
Yep, isn't that Warcry?
There's 2.
There's 2, right? And so he was playing, Underworlds, right? And so he was representing the U.S. Army esports team in that regard. So it wasn't just about 40K. It wasn't just about that. Like taking the team and being able to have that representation. Like representation's important, and it's not just about. We have some awesome, amazing players for 40K. Like you said, you mentioned, Weston has knocked it out of the park with Space Marines consistently in a lot of ways. And we've got some other folks that are really good in competitive aspects too. But it really being able to, I'm glad to have the representation and the people. I'm glad to hopefully try and support people to get them to be able to get out there and do more. And so that's kind of one of the things we've looked at. And there is a balance, understanding what an individual's objectives and goals are, and what they want to do and how they want to go about it. And I can admit, I'm as a team manager, I try to support the individuals and where they want to go to different extents. There's some things, especially with it being like the United States Army and whatnot, that there's a lot more behind the scenes maybe, and trying to get some of that to work has really been my personal endeavor as the team captain and manager, trying to help people where I can. It hasn't always, on my own part, there are places that I can improve and try and work out, but it's really been appreciated where some of the team members like Weston have you've just gone above and beyond with some of the expectations that I think anybody, and it's cool because when you look at it, there's a general somewhere who, like, signed off on the U.S. Army esports coming out, and there's a clear mission and intent, and you've got all these different soldiers and veterans and community members across the board that are really excited to be able to support something like this because of how it contributes to the community, and the different people that we've been able to engage with along the way. I do think some of the other aspects we look at. We've got the Las Vegas team tournament coming up, right? And so the approach going into that is, okay, we have 2 teams going to the Las Vegas team tournament. And there was a little bit of a focus one way or the other on how we were going to approach that with the teams. And I do think that there's some weight in providing, okay, who do we have that are heavy hitters, with what codexes do they have available, and how are we going to create this event, right? How are we going to go into this event, and what's it going to look like? And so we have a red team, for example, who has Cullen Burns, Mark H, who was on here previously, Seth Piper, Ivan Cho that I mentioned, and Wes Talley. And so those are the 5 that are going to make the USAE 40K red team. And then the white team is going to be myself. Weston is with us on that one, right? And then a few others. Yeah, Chris, right? And then a couple others that we're all going to compile into that. And so with those, it was, to not have too much codex fratricide, right? Make sure that we have it spread out. That was one thing we considered. Then also looking at where the team members are, and then how we can line them all up. And so it's been pretty awesome going into it, being able to say, hey, we're going to send 2 teams, and this is and approach it. And that we've got some really good players on both teams, and how are we going to try and skew it a little bit here or approach it from this direction here? And we're still fleshing some things out as we've got a little time. But it's really exciting. And so I hope that kind of laid out some of our things operationally and how we've gone about this.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that answered not just that question, but another couple questions I had in advance, too. But one of the things I wanted to focus on that you talked about there is kind of how you set up those 2 different teams, the red and the white team. Obviously, that is a hard decision where you have to tell someone, hey, you're on this team, you're on that team, because at the end of the day, there's probably one team that's a little more stacked than the other, or things like that. So is it just codex fratricide, or how do you determine, hey, you're on the varsity team, or you're on the junior varsity team?
So in the background, we do have what's called the main team, the academy team, and the watch list, right? And so as my infrastructure to the team, the main team are the folks that they've been in the system for a little bit, they're inundated. They know, okay, we have a meeting we've got a meeting coming up here. We regularly meet. They know what goes into it. They're participatory. They understand there's Army standards we have to meet, and there's other aspects to it. But they're also all competitively performing, and those 3 aspects I mentioned, they're all pretty much check green in those. And so then the academy team is where some of the aspects are being developed, or we're trying to figure out if they can make the events and get through it. And then we look at, those are the academy teams being developed to be able to bring them up to either join the main team or replace people on the main team. As people, it's kind of cyclical in regards of sometimes people get busy with work, because this is ultimately just a volunteer duty for a volunteer hobby for us. We're already doing it because it's our hobby, but everybody gets caught up with real life to one extent or another. And then we've got the watch list, which is where so I'm ultimately limited by the actual team in regards of how many slots I can have in those 2. And the watch list is where anybody that wants to contribute, that wants to get on the radar, that possibly wants to be part of the academy or the main team, can be in the watch list. And really, we're fully supportive of working with watch list folks, because here's the next really big trick of going into it with these 2 teams, even for the Las Vegas team tournament, and I think a lot of people don't really think about it until you start to get into it, is the logistics of it, right? Okay, so we got to get 10 people minimum to this event at this given time. You got to synchronize everybody's schedule. You got to get them all through, and all of these players have real life duties and jobs and other missions and everything that they're doing. And so we've got to synchronize that. So that's one part. The logistics piece, I think, is a really huge undercurrent of who we can bring in, where we can get them to, and how we line that up. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that piece before we go into, I think, really more of where your question was going. And that's into, okay, so the red team, for example. I mean, we're talking Seth Piper, Cullen Burns, Wes Talley, and Mark Aish. If you take all those four and you put them in ITC, they are pretty high up there on the list. And
That's
honestly,
a stacked team, yeah.
that is a stacked team, right? And Weston's not that far from them either. He might even Weston. I maybe have you beat out old Mantooth? Have you beat out Talley yet?
No, he's ahead of me. He's
Okay.
ahead of me right now. That's why he's up there.
Yeah, but I know you're toe and toe. I watch you guys at the events. I mean, it's really close, and so that's what's cool is because when we go from the red team to the white team, and so Ivan Cho is the team captain of that, and he's awesome. Ivan is an amazing. Like when we talk about this operational level, like I mean, we're a team that has a staff, right? And I know you go to Art of War and you look at some of the other teams, like there are staffs. I mean, even Weston does some amazing work as far as with the Facebook page and helping to line up some of these things that we're doing. Like we're all contributing at these broader levels than just, can we get to play a game or something like that. And so Ivan's running. He's going to be the team captain for the red team. I'm going to be the team captain for the white team, which is me and Weston and Chris and a couple others. And so arguably you can see where we stacked red team with who could make it and what's available. And then myself and Weston and brought in some of the others that we're going to be able to represent in the white team. And we're even considering maybe even making a blue team. And so that's given the space available and the participants, and if we can actually get some folks to it and how we can source that, like there's even a possibility for a third team. So we're not limiting ourselves, but just understanding logistically the difficulties of bringing it all together to make just those two teams is quite a bit. And so you can see where we've put some heavy hitters in red team, and that's not to diminish white team. I think that it has just as much capability in its own regards. And so I'm really excited to see how that plays out. Something else, if I can just throw in there with the whole team aspect, that, talking to some folks that are running some of these events, what I'd really like to see and kind of build into is this team aspect of even having like a pit stop kind of area, like a team club area, that even if you had to pay a little bit more to have that, like how many times do you go to an event, even especially the larger events? And I'm not saying it's a huge drag, but you've got to kind of find your own place to sit or be at, right?
Mm-hmm.
With these team events, I'd really like to have kind of this like team club area where we can go back to and we can talk about stuff, and we can, it's our area recognized with whatever branding material or something like that, and we can put all our stuff, and it's relatively secure that we're all there and it's not just haphazardly put somewhere else. And we can talk about stuff, we can meet up there, we can rally there, what have you, and other people know that we're there too, and so it's easier to identify where we're at and they can find us there. And so that's just something that I thought would be cool to add into it. But yeah, so hopefully I got close enough in the ballpark to answering your question on team composition there.
No, yeah, I think that was very awesome, not just on terms of all the things you're doing just for logistics, but there's community organizing, there's deliberate development, there's hard choices you got to make with teams and, moving people in different levels. So that's all very good and probably something that a lot of people don't realize is part of much larger, teams and clubs. So Weston, I wanted to go over to you to ask you a couple questions. So one of the things that Red was talking about was how, he picked people to represent different codices because you can't overlap some of them in these team tournaments. So my questions to you is because you play Space Wolves, and that's been your army that you've been playing for years and years, and also some Chaos. But let's say I said, hey, Weston, I've got a AdMech army or a full Drukhari army, and I'm your teammate. You just take my army and play with it. It's the best army. What are your opinions on that for team tournaments?
I mean, that's definitely an option. So like I am expanding to a second army because having one army does limit me, especially now that Space Wolves are rolled in with Space Marines. So like that's a lot of armies that are locked out by just one player playing it. So like even if like me and Wes, or like I had a higher score than someone else on Wes's team, we still couldn't be on the same team because we're both Marines. So like no matter what, like we wouldn't be on the same team. So that's why I'm trying to branch out into like a Chaos Army as well to help with that. But the I've done that before. But not like in a competitive sense. I've done that where I've taken like another team, like another player's army, and I'll play it, and he'll play my army, just to try it out and to like to get feels for it. I've never really done it in a pure tournament setting. I guess if you're good with it, like I don't see a problem with it. There's plenty of people out there that commission armies or just like go with the next flavor of the month every month. There's plenty of tournament players you'll see out there that are always with a new army every single event. Like you'll see them. It helps feed the hobby. It's like I mean I can't blame them. It's and it's what they like. I don't personally see anything against it. I like to own one army. Like I right now I'm around 20,000 fully painted for Space Wolves, and I have like another 5,000 unpainted or unbuilt, just because I've kind of collected stuff over the years. I like the idea of having a massive army because one of my biggest draws to 40k is Apocalypse, and I love playing Apocalypse. I like spending 2 whole days playing a game while you just get drunk and roll dice and make a fun story. It's a really good time. Tournaments are fun, but like if I could only do Apocalypse, I'd probably just only do Apocalypse.
Yeah, and so one of the things about that too I wanted to talk about was the actual like specific lists and things models in your list. So let's say either 3-person or 5-person. How are you planning out those lists differently for a team tournament with attacker and defender as opposed to just a best of one regular GT type of game?
Me personally, so when I don't know, I haven't really personally planned out. So there is a there you can definitely designate someone as like the hand grenade taker, someone whose army won't score high, but you know for a fact the opponent won't score high either. Because like those low score win games are very important because like it'll affect this team score in the long run. So like if you can throw someone at a player who's got like a super hyper good army that you just can't stop, let them score low and like they get a 75 point or a 60 point win. And that'll matter because like the other games you can pull out like 90 80 point wins and it'll just put you ahead in the long run.
Okay, and
So like planning.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say if you have more to go for it. Otherwise, I'll kind of push that over to Red.
Okay, yeah, I've never personally planned because I'm pretty sure they're called gatekeeping lists. I've never personally played any gatekeeping lists besides one. I've played one team event. It was back in the beginning mid 8th when Guard was running around with their 4 Lords of War and Knights were rampant. I just took the 3 Shadow Swords, Trojans, and Yark with a couple Assassins, and my whole job was literally to get thrown at Knight players. That's all I did, and it didn't matter. Because Knights were good, but like Shadow Swords in 8th edition were really ridiculous. If once they failed their save, they were done. It was over for the Knights, and I was basically a gatekeeping list because if I fought anyone else, they would kill me and outscore me.
And so, yeah, I wanted to toss over a similar question to Red. Is so you got that 5-man team. Is everyone bringing a take-all-comers list? Are you getting some skew lists in there? How are you building out the actual lists?
So we haven't dug. I mean, we have general ideas. We've talked a little bit, but to be fair, we haven't talked in depth yet outside of making sure that, okay, can these people make it or not and whatnot. And so there's a little bit more kind of letting the dust settle on who can and can't make it. But going into it, that's absolutely something to have a discussion about that I would expect we're going to discuss comprehensively as something, because I also think through collaboration, right? Okay, I'm the team captain, I'm the team manager, Ivan's the team captain of Team Red, what have you. But that doesn't mean that there's necessarily a final say in how we go about developing this yet. Because we don't have to have it locked in yet. And so I do think that there's some good strategy towards, okay, there's going to be some skewed list here, there's going to be some skewed list here that you can use to throw one way or the other. One time at ATC, I took, back when it was viable, the 3 Tesseract vaults for Necrons. And that's clearly a very skewed list, right? And so there was quite a bit going on. This was still 8th edition, but there's something too when one of your players brings all Chaos Knights, or they play Chaos and they bring Monster Mash. And so there's something to that. And I think that it can really throw off, when you play a skew list like that, it can really throw off an all-comers list. And I'm not saying everybody needs to be that, but I do think that it's worth considering bringing in something like that. And there's other lists that are going to make it very difficult for some of the more competitive lists specifically to be the most effective that they could be. And so to find that, like, Weston mentioned a gatekeeper or something like that, I think it's very important. But what I do in this phase that we're currently at is what I really want to incorporate is the collaborative efforts of the overall team, because we do have so many different people that are playing in so many different metas that you want to be able to bring in and recognize, okay, there is a broader meta. We see the competitive events, but everyone else across the wider regions are seeing a bunch of other smaller events, and they can see different metas and what people might be contributing to this larger team event. Because there's only, I mean, you take the competitive events that we're tracking now, which are all single player matchups, and then you combine them into larger player. Yes, there's a lot of aspects that are going to repeat themselves or rhyme, right? It's going to be kind of a rhyming thing where it rhymes with LSO or ACO or what have you. But for the most part, there's always going to be these skewing outliers that are going to throw it to one extent or another. And so where can we do that to one regard, but still moderately balance our approach here or there to make sure we're taking advantage of some of the most competitive aspects. And so that's very much a conversation that our whole team has to have. I'm really looking forward to what everybody's going to bring to it, because I imagine we can talk about what's going on, and we have people that participated at LSO or ACO, and they did pretty well, and we have other people that at the same time were winning at Barnyard Brawl or what have you. And so there's a lot of people across the board that have been performing in different areas, and I think that collaboration is going to be really key in what we end up settling on going here into September.
Yeah, it just seems like there's so much space to explore with these team tournaments and so much kind of uncharted territory that we just don't get to play enough of these team tournaments to really know what the best strategy is. So I'm definitely just as excited as you are, and I, obviously wish you guys the best of luck. So I want to go a little more tactical here. Back to you, Weston. So I want you to kind of tell us about what's going through your mind when you get paired up with a, at the most recent team tournament. Your team pairs against another team. How are you talking about those pairings and, attacker, defender, all those styles? What's going through your mind?
Usually so like I said, we like to pre-play, and except for the first round, typically you know who you're going to fight, so you can look at their list at least 10 minutes prior to the actual pairings going up. But like if you get like a random, say like it's the first round, you get paired, usually both team captains and players will spend like 5 minutes looking at each other's list and handing it back and forth and just looking at it around. You kind of want to prep pregame, so like you want to know who can handle what. So like an example, someone might be really good at like fighting normal Death Guard, but they can't handle like Terminus-esque, the special detachment. So you don't want to throw them at that. Or like me, I have trouble dealing with knights for some reason. Just can't deal with them. I can outscore them, but I'll die. But I can handle like custodes, which is weird. It's just a weird trade-off. Like some people are really good with certain armies. You want to try to avoid pairing people up with an army they're not super knowledgeable on. So like when that team event hit, and AdMech had just came out. They were literally just out doing all their shiny stuff. And we had an AdMech player on our team, and like usually we would throw him at like either the worst list for us to deal with, or we'd put him at like a list that we were confident he would get 100 points on, because so other games we could probably just like mid score it or keep it to a low score, maybe win just barely or something like that. Stuff like that really. Researching, it's really important to know like every army out there, even because like Genestealer Cult, no one plays it anymore really, but like they have a lot of fancy rules, and if you don't have any experience against the army, even if it's like a low tier codex, like it can still catch you by surprise. I still see every once in a while, I'll see someone catch people off guard with Tyranids, because they're just inexperienced with them, because you don't see them everywhere.
And then Red, similar to you, at that kind of like that tactical level of leadership, how are you making those decisions on who's going to play what? And could you think of any examples of times you've had to do that and choices you've made?
Absolutely. I mean, and so going into it, and I think that so the first time ATC. I was playing Necrons, and I knew that this was right as 8th edition dropped, so we had the indexes more or less. I knew that I had an incredibly resilient force. I was not the team captain at that time, but I knew that I could, as a participating member of the team, go forward and say exactly like what Weston was saying. I think I can handle this. I think I'm going to struggle with this. I don't know what's going to happen there. I do know this, that, those kinds of things, and that's very helpful, I think, to a team captain. And repeating that, and the next time that I went, I was playing the triple Tesseract vaults. Okay, I have these 3 things. I can put out an inordinate amount of mortal wounds, and I know I need to be able to do that. And so the next part goes to the team captains. Like I know it's tough for some teams because they don't have certain degrees. Maybe they're not always used to levels of hierarchy, and so it can always be interesting to see team dynamics play out with some folks, because some people are really good at working together, collaborating, whatnot. Other people, when you come up to a disagreement or there's friction, how do you manage that? How do you settle that? And I think that there's something to being able to enable a person to at some point just make a call, just make the decision. Okay, you're going to do this and do this. And that's where it really comes down to, in a lot of cases, of picking a team captain and trusting them mutually throughout the team, understanding that they have knowledge that they're able to integrate across the team and be able to pull it together to make those decisions, because it can be really tough when you're looking at some of these matchups. I mean, right now, like as Weston, you mentioned talking about AdMech and things like that. Everybody knows more or less what AdMech is capable of, even after the FAQ right now. And we know what Drukhari are capable of. We know what Sisters are capable of. But have we seen? And I'm just using an example. I'm not saying that this is gonna like suddenly break the game or anything. But have we really seen Be'lakor and his all of his army stuff go out right up to the table? And you see that. Who really knows that? Who has the inside concept and understanding of it? And as a team captain, I think it's very important that you're able to pull that together from the team, know where the strengths and weaknesses of your team are, and that takes a little bit of working together. It's really hard to bring it together, kind of mishmash without talking through a lot of that, and it takes some time spent, and then to be able to say, okay, like here's this, here's that. Okay, we understand this, we value this. Like where can we pull those things? But ultimately, to have the 4 other members of the team turn to the one and say, are we good? And that one says, yep, let's do it. And even right or wrong, just accepting that and going into it and then hitting it as hard as you can. There is something too, and this is a really big deal, transitioning between the games, being able to quickly assess between the group and bring it together and say, okay, do we make the right decision? Where can we improve, and how are we going to go forward into the next one? And that's very important, not getting hung up on the call being made one way or the other, but just how can you improve and how can you go into the next one? And I think that that's just as equally important of a skill as it is on the front end of being able to make those judgment calls. If you can't improve and you continue to just ignore each other and can't communicate, it's just not going to be as good of an event as it could have been. And so I think that there's a lot of value into those things personally.
I can certainly imagine there's conflict in between gaming groups in terms of who's really in charge, because a lot of gaming groups don't have that specific military hierarchy of like, well, Red, you're the major, so you make the decision at the end of the day. But I think there's something to be said too, like you were talking about, in terms of leadership, followership, kind of faith in each other, where you trust Wes enough to be able to say, for him to be able to say, hey, I can't take that army, or I can. And then he has enough faith in you that he's going to trust your decision and not, be mad or something like that if it doesn't go as well as you guys had planned. So I think that's totally great, and something that's also not nearly talked about enough is having faith in your fellow team members and the decisions you guys make.
Yeah, and also accept that, like, everyone wants to be competitive. Everybody likes winning, as I mentioned before. But at the same time, also understanding where your team is at in certain regards. How many Las Vegas team tournaments have we gone to together? None. How many ATCs has the U.S. Army Esports been able to represent at? None. And so, given the opportunity, though, we're going to go into this, and it's really like, okay, we're going to go in. We've got some competitive players. We know, like, but really, we want this to be a good event where we want to keep coming back to together and be able to play with the people that we played against again and again and again. And so, understanding that really should help shape a lot of the expectations and regards of where the team's at, what you're trying to accomplish, and where you're trying to go. Okay, we're going to go to this event. We're going to do as well as we can. We're going to try and improve and adapt while we're in the event and really come out of it better for it no matter what, so that we can keep going into events and doing better and continuing to build a better community for all of us. And I know that sounds kind of esoteric and aspirational, but I really truly think that that's practical and attainable, and that we can do those things, and that it sets so much up in the right frame of reference in certain ways to how do you value what you're going into, and how do you value coming out of it? Because even if you go in and you don't do that well, okay, how did we miss that? Did we not understand the format appropriately? Did we not understand what we brought or what we assumed going in was going to be good or competitive in certain ways? Okay, so we need to reorient, we need to reframe, we need to fix whatever, maybe there's something communication wise we need to address, and then we need to pick it up and go again and do it again and again and again. And so, like, there's a lot of good, I think, forward momentum in that, and also just acknowledging where we're at going into this team tournament, and hopefully many more following it.
Yeah, no, that's totally awesome. I definitely like how much thought you guys put into the community aspect of it, not just the how do we win the next tournament. There's so much depth to it. So I'm going to give each of you an opportunity to talk about some of your final thoughts on team tournaments in general, and then we'll go into the final segment, which is kind of like a thing I called Genius or Grifter, and I'll explain that when we get to it. So hopefully no more than 15 or 20 minutes. So starting with you, Weston, final thoughts, team tournaments, way forward, what are you thinking about?
I like team tournaments a lot. I would prefer to attend them more often than like normal ones. I enjoy them a lot. I'm like the community area where we're at. It's small, but I'm trying to build it back up again because COVID kind of dispersed everyone. I would love to be able to host team events there. Right now, we just hosted RTT last week. We got 19 out of 20 players signed up to show up, which was if anyone's hosted an event, that's pretty successful because people like to just not show up or not say anything. I would love to host events. I like team events a lot. I think it builds. It just helps you. It teaches people to work with each other and stuff, and it's an important, like, I almost want to say life skill to work with other people and understand it. Because I mean, you guys, everyone here has been to events or something. The 40K community, most people aren't like the most social or the best at it.
Yep.
Like we've all met those people. So like, it's working with people, working with other teammates, and even against your opponents and stuff. It's always good to have that those social skills, and team events I do believe help that. Like I said, I grew up, and my first really 3-4 years of 40K was only team events, just playing with other kids.
Yeah, and Red, any saved rounds about team tournaments? Things to say to people who haven't played in a team tournament yet or are thinking about it?
So going into it, I think Weston probably is the best highlight on this conversation, and how you said, Weston, this is how you started. This is how you got into it. I think that there's so much power to like that in the community aspect, is that for all that I've said about what I thought were maybe some ideal factors to the most competitive or most whatever kind of team tournament, whatever your community is doing that you can do and participate in. And if it is team tournaments, just like you described, Weston, and how you got started, that's awesome. I think that's great. I think that no one should say that this is the wrong format or what have you up front, because there's nothing, as I said before, there's no data or anything that's indicating that there is a best format. And so what's working for a community should totally be capitalized on and taken advantage of. And if that's what gets people into it and gets people playing together, and all that goes along with that, I totally think that people should take advantage of it. Please, don't feel limited or constrained to play a specific way just because some person told you that they think it's better. Eventually when you get out into a lot of the broader events, you're going to be pulled into that, right? You're going to be pulled into, okay, this is how the standardized format to playing or what have you. But if your community likes to play a certain way, then play that way. Play that format that your community appreciates, that hopefully you've bought into as well, and you can do that. I think it's great because really it's just getting people together to play the game anyways. And so I just wanted to tack on that because I made some earlier judgments, and I stand by those too. But there is a lot of weight in growing and developing, and it doesn't always have to be, the perfect, whether it's the ITC standard or whatever variations might come up. So.
Okay, yeah, and then the next thing I wanted to talk about was kind of the segment called Genius or Grifter. So the idea is I'm going to read out a scenario for you guys, a brief, quick sentence, and you're going to tell me that's either a very smart thing to do or a very slimy thing to do, kind of a strategy thing. So I got this from Limited Resources, which is a Magic the Gathering podcast. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of that, but we'll start with Weston. So this is in a tournament, and you're asking your opponent if they want to talk out the game when there's still a chance they can win.
Oh, you mean like if you did like a super heavy blow and they're kind of looking down?
Yeah, let's say it's turn 2. It looks pretty rough for them, but maybe there's a 5% chance they can win. And you say, hey, you want to just talk it out, man? I mean, it's over.
I don't think that's either, honestly, because, it takes two to tango. It's not like you're forcing them to do it. I've had plenty of games where it's like that. I've played at events where I played an event one time where everything went perfect for my opponent, and he more or less tabled me turn 1. I was like, all right, let's talk this out. Because I'm not going to sit here for 5 turns with 2 squads and hide. It's waste of time. So I don't think that's necessarily scummy or genius. I think that's more of like if you kind of if you do it in more of like a brag it kind of way and act like, like you should talk this out because there's nothing, you're not going to do anything, then yeah, that's kind of crappy. But I don't know. I wouldn't say that's neither scummy or genius.
Okay, Red. So let's say you're playing a game and your opponent starts putting out Deep Strike, and you remind them, oh, hey, just remember, I've got Auspex Scan, but you have no intention of using it.
So I think in it's tough between Genius or Grifter because it kind of doesn't cover it. In this aspect, you want to make sure your opponent knows everything that's available, and if it's unprompted, I think that there's some grifter aspects to it. I do think that there's some, like, why do you take what are they, intercessors? Not intercessors, is that right?
Yep, that's intercessors who do Auspex Scan.
What does the unit do? What does the unit
do?
do?
They can. No, well, but which ones are they? Man, they're my favorite. The Phobos. They're my favorite.
Infiltrators.
Infiltrators are incursors.
Infiltrators, yeah. Infiltrators that prevent, 12-inch bubbles or whatnot. Like, you kind of take infiltrators because it deters people from thinking that they can get in there and get a 9-inch charge on you to a certain extent, right? And I think that there's so much in certain regards that you want to be upfront and available to your opponent, and I think mentioning that you have Auspex Scan is important so that they understand like what they're walking into, even if you're not planning on using it. You could even go as far. I think that where the differentiation here comes in is that I think in Genius realm, like opening up and saying like, hey, I have Auspex, just giving you a heads up, I also have Auspex Scan, so if there's any concerns or whatever with what I can do while you're deep striking it, and you can even add in there, here's where I go with Genius. I'm not planning on using it, but I'm just telling you, like, I have Auspex Scan. It is a thing I can do. Grifter is where you're being, I guess, intentionally deceptive to that regard, because this is a game, it's not a real tactical engagement where I think deception should be involved at all levels of warfare.
Okay, next one, because I had a similar an example of this where in my last tournament, someone asked me like, hey, did you mean to charge your Redemptor into this unit or whatever? And I was like, oh, maybe I should do that. And then I did it, and it was a terrible idea. So I got
That's actually a real genius plan.
Yeah,
I want to point that out.
He totally got me. It was such a bad idea.
Now, if you do that, and if someone says that and you do that, and then they make you fight last, that's where it comes scummy because that was a deliberate trap.
It was basically that bad. Okay, next one. So back to you, Weston. So Getting to the table early, putting your stuff on the side of the table you want so that your opponent is more likely to choose the other table. Genius or grifter?
I honestly, if this is a genius thing, I've fallen victim to this a lot. I will admit that when it comes to moving my army around, I have a giant tray, and I do get lazy. I get tired standing there all day. So typically, unless there's one side that I notice offers a big advantage, because a lot of events I've been going to, the tables are pretty symmetrical when it comes to terrain setup. Now, if it's place terrain, then I don't think it matters at all. But I don't know. I guess if you really want that side and you put your army there, it might be genius. I don't think it's scummy because like you could still lose the roll off, or you can get your side and then go second or something. You know, like there's so much involved in that. Like that's like kind of like those 4 steps ahead type thing that requires some cheating to make it perfect.
Right. Yeah, I agree with Weston on that. I think that putting your stuff down on the side that you want pregame is really like I do believe to a certain degree in kind of asserting yourself and to what you want to certain extents, but ultimately it always comes down to a roll, right? A dice roll. So it's I think it's an illusion of confidence that's maybe helps you personally, but ultimately it's hard to be a grifter in that regard. I agree.
Yeah, because the opponent can always just choose it if they want to, as long as they don't mind moving their models. Right. Okay, next one to you, Red. Let's say you and Weston are both at a tournament where there's no how do you call it, unambiguous winner. Like they're both going to be undefeated going into the last round, but you don't think you can actually beat the person you're playing against. Do you then you would purposely submarine to allow Weston to have a better shot of winning based on battle points? Is that genius or grifter?
So wait.
Go ahead, Weston.
Yeah, let's rewalk this one real quick because that's pretty broad. So you mean there's 3 people right now fighting for top table, basically, or first place, and so technically all 6 of those players would be undefeated. Right. And the goal, or at least 4 players would be undefeated. Yep. And the goal is to allow your teammate to win and boost their score up so they can beat whoever wins on the other side. Yeah, that's kind of scummy.
Yeah, so
that's scummy. There's a certain team that's famous for that right now. So.
Yeah. Well, not giving your own person more points, but you're playing against an enemy and you purposely try to have a low-scoring game because at the end, battle points.
Oh, you mean you're trying to tank your opponent so your friend can score
exactly.
higher? No, that's totally good. That's a normal 40K thing. No, that's a normal 40K thing. Yeah, of course. That's typical.
So this is where I get into, I think, the team tournament deal. It's typical, but I'll admit I don't necessarily agree with it personally. It is something that is done quite often, and there are some that do it more than others. I think if you go to an event, and I know this is a little bit, there's virtues, principles, so on and so forth, blah, blah, blah. I think if you go into an event and it's a single person event, as in it's just you and your army playing against anyone else and their one army. I think regardless, I think the team structure in certain ways kind of leaves the table at that point, if that makes sense. I think you walk into that tournament as it's your competition to a certain extent. And I think that if you play against someone else, you should play, and this is personally, you should play as hard as you can the whole way. Because that way, you're playing, and there's some things that, and this goes beyond even like the topics we've talked about. It explodes into this whole other realm of what some people think about. If you go as hard as you can in day 1, table 3 and table 4 of a 6-round tournament are going to be extremely tough because you're playing against the other people that have similar scores, because we play by battle points, not necessarily by margins of victory, right? And so some people, I understand, will not do that. They will slow it. They'll pace themselves to a certain extent so that they're still winning, because by the time of it, you get to the end. And that's where we talk about, okay, if tactics relate to any one game, and then there's an operational kind of tactic, which is a tournament event, and then there's the strategy, which is, okay, I'm looking at my team point events and how they go. There is something to it where so what I said up at the front was very much in the tactics piece of it, the one game to game approach versus a tournament approach versus a seasonal approach. And so I understand, Weston, what you're saying, because that there's aspects of operational and strategic victory in that, right?
Okay, well, this is.
But there is also a fine line between a low-scoring game and you winning. So like,
True.
I've come to realize that deliberately trying to make both players score low is extremely hard, because typically if you're gonna force your opponent to score low, you should be scoring high, unless you can like get him all his primaries but make sure he gets no secondaries, which is still really hard because given how the book secondaries are out there, almost every army now has an auto 15 points. So like, it's really hard to make someone score low without you scoring high as well.
So I think
There's a lot going into that.
I think some of the things that the thing you described, Red, is called submarining, is what I've heard it as. So
There is an aspect to that, yeah.
Yeah. So it brings me to the my last question for you is, let's say you're in a tournament, you're playing against me, so you're easily gonna 110 me, right? You know, let's say turn 2, you've already tabled me. Do you just pull your guys off objectives and get a low scoring win so you can purposely play against lower wins, you know, going forward? Like, you know what I mean? You were saying be lower quality opponents and increasing your chances of winning. What do you think about that?
So this is kind of my issue with battle points I keep bringing up, is that's why I prefer margins of victory personally. However, going into it and answering your question up front, I personally like to run full pace in every game, because I like to, and by full pace, it doesn't mean I just like totally crush the other person and just, you know, walk away like high-fiving myself or something. But like, I don't like to hold back. I personally don't like that. I know it is a thing. I won't call someone a grifter for doing that because of what I listed in the previous question. There is a strategic and an operational approach. If you want to get there, then you understand like you're gonna have to do it. But I personally, I like the Olympics. Like, I want to qualify against other gold medalists the entire time that I can, while I can, right? I want to prove to myself that I can push as hard as I can through each of those events. And I kind of play lists like that do it to that certain extent. I either can like really go out and have a really good game with it, or I just get crushed to certain extents, like with my corn based list and things like that. And so that's my personal approach, but I wouldn't call someone a grifter necessarily for submarining. If people don't like the aspect of submarining, then all they change the mechanics to make it so it's not a thing as much. I know it's almost impossible to remove, but I do think that there's ways to address it.
Okay, and Weston, your thoughts on it?
Submarine is a very common tactic. I wouldn't say common. Submarine is a tactic people use a lot. Like, you'll see that a lot of people will not necessarily like try to score low, but they'll take secondaries that only max out at like 12 points or something in the first rounds, just because they're afraid to fight at the top. But what ends up happening is, almost because everyone does that, they end up fighting each other anyways. That's usually what happens. So like, you can't really submarine until you get to a really big event.
True. I mean, I saw a player at LVO just barely. I mean, he intentionally built his list to win, but submarine all the way to the top 16, and then he got beat in the top 16. And that's part of the I guess the balancing effect to it, is that he built a list that could submarine and get him the wins all the way to that, but it still wasn't a competitive enough list to endure beyond that. I think he was hoping that it could continue to excel. But again, if people don't want people doing that, then you can just change the structure so that they can't do that. It doesn't take a lot of effort to make that happen, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I think that should be part of the game. Okay, awesome, cool. Well, I think that wraps up all my questions. So I wanted to give you guys each an opportunity to plug whatever you want, and that's all I have. So we'll start with you, Weston.
I don't personally have anything to say that I can think of off the top of my head.
I imagine Red's gonna plug the Army Esports team and the Golden
Yeah,
Black
exactly.
anyway. So I figured I'd give you the opportunity first if you had anything else. But yeah, Red, go for it.
Actually, I'd like to. I'm going to take a kind of a cheesy opportunity here. Weston, you can go ahead. You plug the Army Esports team and Black and Gold Wargaming. Give it a go.
Darn, I should have prepped for this.
You did it last time.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you'll see us around playing the esports team. I mean, you can always come and say hi if anyone has questions. we've got merchandise and we have the Facebook page as well. I try to hand out dice to opponents every time, so if you see me, I'll probably give you an option between like 3 or 4 different types of dice. Our Black and Gold Wargaming Facebook page is growing steadily. If you're up in Georgia, Columbus area, Columbus, Atlanta, just around that area, I do try to host monthly RTTs at the game store that I'm at. So like you can always come down to that. Our goal is to turn it into a GT at some point. He does have the space to get it about 50 tables in there, so that was ideal to get like 100 players. It'd be awesome. Go bigger, go even bigger than a GT maybe. But yeah, I wasn't really ready for this, so I do apologize. So
No,
I'm
you
sure
did great.
I'm sure the team captain will correct the mistakes later. Yeah, if anything else you can take away, Red.
No, that was awesome, Weston. You're spot on it, man. Again, it's community outreach. The mission that we have is to just build a better community. I couldn't have asked to be part of a better team with better teammates in a lot of regards, and so it's an awesome opportunity for us. And if folks are interested, it is a little there is some bureaucracy and infrastructure behind it, but it really is about engaging with people and getting us out there to do more. And so if anybody's interested in it, feel free to reach out to us. You can find us Black and Gold Wargaming on Facebook. I'm under Red Powell on Facebook. You can reach out to me. There are several people who I appreciate that have reached out. We are in a window where we're gathering applications for people interested, and so the official U.S. Army esports team is active duty and reserves, and then there's also a National Guard team. And so there's a lot of opportunity for people that are serving, and then for those that are interested in the community or are veterans or whatnot, there's a lot that goes beyond it. We're not just that is the official team, but there's a lot more to this and what we're doing with the team as a whole with people. So by all means, if you're interested, reach out to us. Feel free to hit up Weston. It's great, and I appreciate the time for allowing us to share about this because it's really good to be able to talk to new people, Dan. So thank you for this opportunity.
Yep, thank you.